Welcome back to Live from Paris. I'm Haxi Myers-Belkin. The headlines. 3 more people die in one of 24 wildfires raging in Northern California, with soaring temperatures and strong winds continuing to fan the flames. Fires also forcing people to flee their homes in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Fire strikes again in Greece's decimated Moria migrant camp, one day after a blaze swept through the facility, leaving thousands without shelter. Questions now mounting about the migrants' fate. And hundreds of police officers take to the streets of Buenos Aires to demand better working conditions and more money. The country reeling from a spike in new COVID-19 cases and a dire economic downturn. Thank you very much for joining us. Also coming up this half hour, we head to Sweden, one of the few countries not to impose a nationwide lockdown at the start of the pandemic in Europe. Like many of its neighbours, Sweden's economy has taken a hit, but it seems the worst was avoided. A thick orange haze hangs over swathes of California as a series of wildfires in the state continue to spread. A record heat wave and high wind, A record heat wave and high winds continue to exacerbate the situation, with thousands of people in communities near the city of Oroville the latest to be ordered to evacuate. The fires have so far ravaged around 1 million hectares in California alone, but Oregon and Washington are also bearing the brunt. Claire Rush reports.
Apocalyptic scenes in the San Francisco Bay Area. On Wednesday, residents woke up to an eerie orange glow, the sky so filled with smoke it blocked all sunlight in the middle of the day.
I was wondering what time it was, and then I looked outside and it looks like doomsday. I mean, you could tell something is horribly going wrong.
It feels like the end of the world. It's pretty scary.
From San Francisco to Los Angeles, much of California is choking. Fire officials say 28 major wildfires are burning across the state. Peak fire season hasn't even begun yet, but more than 930,000 hectares have already burned this year, a record for the state. California, however, is not alone. All along the West Coast, high winds and soaring temperatures have kicked up wildfires. In Oregon, historic blazes have all but destroyed several towns.
Oregon has experienced unprecedented fire with significant damage and devastating consequences across the entire state. This could be the greatest loss of human lives and property due to wildfire in our state's history.
Similar scenes of devastation in Washington. In the small town of Malden, authorities estimate that 80% of structures have been decimated, including City Hall and the post office.
Most of the residences that I saw were burned to the ground right down to the foundation.
Wildfires are annual occurrences across much of the western U.S., but in recent years, they've become increasingly catastrophic. Experts say climate change is to blame for the worrying trend, a trend likely to worsen further if temperatures continue to rise.
Yet another fire has broken out in what little remained of the Moria migrant camp on the Greek island of Lesbos. That one night after a series of blazes at the severely overcrowded facility forced thousands of migrants to flee into the night. That first night of destruction all but gutted the camp, with NGOs now warning of a humanitarian catastrophe. Karis Garland has the details.
Flames again forcing migrants to flee Moria camp on the island of Lesbos. Wednesday night's fires came after a blaze devastated Greece's largest refugee settlement less than 24 hours earlier. It was housing more than 12,500 people, over 4 times its capacity. No one was injured in either blaze, but thousands are in need of emergency shelter. An investigation is underway to determine the cause of the fire, but the Greek government has accused the migrants of setting the facility alight, calling it a violent reaction to quarantine measures imposed after an outbreak of COVID-19 within the camp.
Ακόμα διερευνούνται οι πραγματικές συνθήκες των γεγονότων. Το δεδομένο είναι ότι η πυρκαγιά ξεκίνησε από ετούντες άσυλο μέσα από τη δομή με αφορμή την καραντίνα. Δεν έχω κάποιο παραπάνω σχόλιο να κάνω από αυτό.
Of 3,500 migrants made homeless, many are to stay in tents, while the most vulnerable are spending Wednesday night on a ferry at a nearby port. The government said 2 Greek Navy vessels would arrive Thursday to provide additional sleeping space. The EU, meanwhile, said it would finance the transfer and accommodation of the camp's 400 unaccompanied minors to the Greek mainland.
Germany says that the EU's migration policies need urgent reform. The country's Minister for Europe advocating for a common refugee intake programme among as many EU countries as possible. Michael Roth saying the recent devastation on Lesbos made this issue all the more pressing. Claire Rush reports.
The German government pledging to help Greece after the Moria migrant camp fire.
Der Bundesinnenminister hat angeboten, Hilfe zu leisten. Es wird also jetzt darum gehen, gemeinsam mit den Griechen zu definieren, welche Form der Hilfe benötigt wird. Da kann man nur sagen, wir haben Griechenland in der Vergangenheit an vielen Stellen geholfen und wir werden das selbstverständlich auch jetzt tun.
Berlin also calling for a coordinated EU solution, urging fellow member states to take in refugees. The fires at Greece's Moria migrant camp have provoked an outpouring of support in Germany, where thousands rallied in Berlin and Frankfurt on Wednesday, urging the government to welcome Moria's homeless.
Die Menschen einfach auch hierher kommen könnten und einfach ein Leben führen könnten und nicht in so einer Hölle wohnen müssten. Deswegen sind wir hier, weil wir sagen, dass die Stadt Frankfurt Platz hat und Deutschland Platz hat.
Immigration, however, remains divisive in Germany. Chancellor Angela Merkel's decision to welcome 1 million refugees, many fleeing Syria's civil war, at the height of Europe's migrant crisis in 2015, sparked severe backlash, prompting numerous anti-Muslim protests and propelling the far-right Alternative for Germany, or AfD, to prominence. It's now the largest opposition party in parliament. Germany, which currently holds the EU's rotating presidency, is now faced with the challenging task of organizing a response to Moria's refugees in a bloc deeply fractured over immigration.
A new book claims that in the early stages of the coronavirus pandemic, US President Donald Trump was aware of how dangerous it was, but played down the threat nonetheless. The president on Wednesday defending his approach, saying that he didn't want people to be frightened. Since January, the virus has claimed almost 190,000 lives in the United States. Monty Francis reports.
Certainly, I'm not going.
A stunning admission from Donald Trump in advance of the release of an upcoming book, Rage, by veteran journalist Bob Woodward. He released audio of an interview he conducted with Trump in February, less than a month into the epidemic.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
Trump also told Woodward of the virus, "This is deadly stuff." It's a vastly different story than he was telling the public.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
Dozens of times in the first 3 months of the epidemic, Trump downplayed the virus or said it was under control. Thursday, Trump himself addressed the controversy, basically restating what he had told Woodward.
Did you mislead?
Well, I think if you said in order to reduce panic, perhaps that's so. The fact is, I'm a cheerleader for this country. I love our country. And I don't want people to be frightened. I don't want to create panic.
Trump's Democratic opponent, Joe Biden, jumped at the chance to make it a campaign issue.
He knew how deadly it was. It was much more deadly than the flu. He knew and purposely played it down. Worse, he lied to the American people.
In the U.S., the coronavirus has claimed the lives of nearly 190,000 people. One study has estimated that if the country had imposed social distancing measures in early March, some 36,000 lives could have been saved.
Only one leading member of Belarus's opposition council remains free. That after lawyer Maxim Znak was, according to an associate, led away from the council's office by masked men. Masked individuals also tried and failed to enter the apartment of Nobel Prize winner Svetlana Alexievich. A number of EU diplomats came to her apartment to prevent her detention. Belarusian authorities have been pursuing a crackdown on dissent since last month's contested election. Our regional correspondent Gulliver Cragg has more.
Aside from the detentions of these high-profile figures, there have again this evening been detentions of ordinary participants in demonstrations. There have been various small-scale demonstrations around Minsk this evening, some of them directly in support of the detained opposition leader Maria Kolesnikova and her colleagues. One of them, at least, was a demonstration comprised entirely of women, but that didn't stop the male riot police from coming and carrying some of them away. The human rights organization Vyasna says that it counted 13 arrests in just one location in Minsk, which means that the total number of arrests around the city and possibly elsewhere in the country is probably quite a lot higher. So the authorities are continuing their crackdown basically on the demonstrators and then also on what it sees as the leadership of this opposition movement. Though Svetlana Alexievich, the Nobel Prize winning writer, who is now the only member of the opposition's Presidium Council that has 7 members to be still at liberty and in Belarus, she said, there are hundreds who can come and take our place. She stressed that this is a grassroots movement and that it is the whole nation that is rising, as she put it, and that it would be the wrong strategy for the authorities to think that they can get this movement to go away by arresting its leaders. But for the moment, that does seem to be the strategy that the authorities are adopting, not just people who are officially leaders of the opposition, but also high-profile people in the world of NGOs, for example, environmental activists, or also 4 leading employees of the IT company PandaDoc, to name just some of the people who've been arrested, not during demonstrations, but when police, or actually just masked men who may or may not be employed by the police, have gone to their offices or homes to take them away. That crackdown continues.
Among the latest group to join anti-government protests in Argentina, the police. Hundreds of officers took to the streets across Buenos Aires on Wednesday. They're demanding better pay and improved working conditions in the midst of the global pandemic. COVID-19 lockdowns have had a disastrous impact on the Argentine economy. That as the infection rate in the country continues to rise. Sweden's strategy for battling COVID-19 has been controversial. The country never imposed a lockdown, unlike most of its EU neighbours, although Swedes did respect government advice to socially distance. The result, an economic slowdown, although to a lesser extent than other European countries. France 24's Catherine Norris-Trent explains.
We're at one of Stockholm's main markets, and the scene here doesn't look radically different than before the coronavirus pandemic broke out. There are no face masks in sight. There are no perspex barriers or health warnings at any of the stands. Swedish authorities have chosen to try and keep life going as normal as far as possible. And a large majority of the population here supports that choice.
I think everyone is taking their own responsibility, and it works pretty well. It's better that each and every one decides what's best than the government, I would say.
I also work with mental health, so I know that we have to keep on moving, otherwise it would be terrible. If people don't have hope, we go crazy in a way.
Even in inside spaces, face masks aren't compulsory. Sweden never enforced a lockdown. Authorities advised people to socially distance and work from home where possible. But at the height of the pandemic, there was a big drop in the numbers coming onto the streets. Right throughout, closed shopping centres and markets such as this one remained open, although businesses were hit hard.
The business went down almost 90% all over the solid hall, so it's been hard times.
I work every day, no salary at all, since March. And we just try to hang in there.
My boss could have fired me, but he's still trying to keep us. So we are very happy about that. So if a salary cuts down a little bit, it's better than losing your job.
Sweden's economy isn't suffering quite as badly as other European countries due to coronavirus. But make no mistake, it is feeling the impact. The economy here shrank 8.6% between April and June, its biggest fall in 40 years.
In recent weeks, torrential rains in the Sahel region of West and Central Africa have left dozens dead and displaced thousands of people. The worst of the weather was experienced in Sudan, but dozens have also died across Niger, Cameroon and Senegal, which is grappling with the worst flooding it's seen in years. Nicolas Germain has the details.
In the Sahel region, the worst-hit country has been Sudan. Floods there have killed more than 100 people. This is footage of southern Khartoum.
وهذا الفيضان والله العظيم لم نشهد له مثيلا. أهلنا يسكن هذه المنطقة يمكن أكثر من 100 سنة يعني. أنا ذات يمكن قاعد هنا 40 سنة. ما حصل فيضان زي ده ولا حصل تكسير زي ده.
Another Sahel country where the floods have wreaked damage is Niger. More than 60 people have died. In the capital Niamey, those who have lost their houses have gathered in this camp for displaced people. Deforestation along rivers is one of the causes of the floods, as people cut down trees to make charcoal. Another problem in Niger is that the floods have destroyed more than 5,000 hectares of crops, especially rice fields. In Senegal, officials said 6 people had died. President Macky Sall has been criticised for the government's response. On Tuesday evening, he went on national television to defend his actions. He promised a package of €5 million to those who had lost everything.
Time now for a reminder of our top headlines here on France 24. 3 more people die in one of 24 wildfires raging in California, with soaring temperatures and strong winds continuing to fan the flames. Fires also forcing people to flee their homes in Washington, Oregon and Idaho. Fire strikes again in Greece's decimated Moria migrant camp, one day after a blaze swept through the facility, leaving thousands without shelter. Questions now mounting about the migrants' fate. And hundreds of police officers take to the streets of Buenos Aires to demand better working conditions and more money. The country reeling from a spike in new COVID-19 cases and a dire economic downturn.